The wind that swept across the outskirts of Pine Hollow carried more than dust. It carried the quiet despair of a woman whose world had been carved down to a single fragile heartbeat. Mara Ellison, once known around town for her musical laugh and bright green eyes, now lived in the dim shadow of loss. Her cabin, perched at the edge of an abandoned wheat field, creaked like her tired bones each time she rose before dawn to begin another hopeless day. It had been 9 months since her husband, Thomas, died in the mining collapse. His body never recovered from the rubble. The day the mine caved in, it took not only her husband, but their future, their savings, their hopes, and every promise he had whispered while brushing her hair back from her face. And as if grief were not cruel enough, it left her with something infinitely more precious and infinitely more vulnerable, their newborn daughter, Layla. Layla was everything Thomas had dreamed of: his smile, her mother's eyes, and a peaceful spirit that made the worst days bearable. Mara rocked her each night in a chair Thomas had carved by hand. But as beautiful as Layla was, she came with a responsibility Mara struggled to meet. Formula, firewood, medicine, everything required money, and money was the one thing Mara no longer had. That was when Brent Callum entered her life. Brent wasn't just any businessman in Pine Hollow. He was a man who thrived on people's desperation. He owned half the saloons, controlled the freight wagons, and loaned money with interest sharp enough to cut bone. Everyone knew better than to owe him, but grief made Mara reckless. She needed supplies, and Brent offered them with a kind of smile that hid knives. She had borrowed a small sum, enough to feed Lila for a month, enough to make one bad decision that would haunt her. Now that debt had grown into something impossible. Brent visited her often, always at dusk, always unannounced, standing in her doorway with the casual cruelty of a man who had never been told no. He tapped his ledger with the back of his knuckle, glancing around her tiny cabin as though measuring what else he might take. "Mara, debts don't disappear because life's been unkind," he'd say, his voice sweet as spoiled molasses. "You owe what you owe." She would clutch Lila tighter, her voice a trembling whisper. "I just need more time." But Brent didn't deal in time. He dealt in fear. Each visit left Mara shaking. By the end of spring, she had sold everything she owned: Thomas's tools, her mother's quilt, the last silver spoon from her wedding set. Still, the debt grew with interest. And Mara, thin from skipping meals to stretch what she had, could hardly keep herself upright some days. One evening, as the sky turned the color of bruised peaches, Brent arrived with a different sort of smile, smug and patient, like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "You can't pay in coin?" he said, stepping into her home without invitation. His eyes drifted to the cradle beside the fire. "But you have assets." Mara's blood turned to ice. "No," she breathed, moving to block his line of sight. "You stay away from my daughter." Brent only chuckled, brushing a fleck of dust from his vest. "A healthy baby is worth more than a pocketful of dollars these days. I could find a good home for her. Or keep her myself. Besides, a debt must be settled." Mara felt her knees weaken as the truth sank in. He wasn't threatening her, not anymore. He was making a promise. In that moment, her world shrank to the tiny bundle breathing softly in the cradle. And Mara understood something with brutal clarity. Brent Callum was going to take her baby, unless she found a miracle. The night it happened, Pine Hollow lay under a sky thick with rolling thunder, the kind that seemed to warn the world of something terrible approaching. Mara Ellison had been awake for hours, rocking baby Lila in her arms as the storm smudged lightning across the hills. She had felt it all day, a gnawing dread, a sense that Brent Callum was done waiting. Lila slept curled against her chest, tiny fingers gripping the fabric of Mara's worn dress. Mara pressed her lips to her daughter's soft hair, inhaling that sweet, milky scent only babies carried. For 9 months, Lila had been the only reason Mara kept rising, kept fighting hunger, kept pushing back despair. Tonight, She clung even tighter, as if her body knew what her mind feared to admit. A sudden pound on the door shattered the fragile quiet. Mara froze. No neighbor knocked like that. Not in the middle of a storm. Then a voice cold, flat, unmistakable. "Open up, Mara. It's time." Brent Callum. Her breath caught. She backed away from the door, clutching Lila so tightly the baby stirred and whimpered. "Go away," she cried, but the wind swallowed her voice. Rain hammered the roof like gunfire. She felt the old wooden boards tremble beneath her bare feet. "Mara," Brent called again, his tone almost patient. "You know why I'm here. This is how a debt gets paid." Before she could plead, the door splintered inward with a violent crack. Two of Brent's men stormed inside, boots dripping with rain and mud. They were large, rough men with dead, hard eyes, men who didn't hesitate. Mara screamed and stumbled backward. "No! Please, please, don't touch her." Brent stepped in behind them, shaking water from his hat. Thunder rumbled behind him like applause. "You had months," he said, voice almost gentle. "I gave you chances." "Too many, some would say." "Take anything else," Mara begged, falling to her knees. "Take the cabin. Take my life if you must. Just don't take her." Brent crouched down, level with her, and for a moment she thought she saw pity. But it vanished like mist. "You have nothing else," he replied simply. He nodded to his men. The first one grabbed Mara by the shoulders, yanking her upright. The second reached for Lila. Mara twisted and screamed, her nails scraping against his arms, her voice breaking as she fought with the wild strength of a mother in terror. But she was no match for two grown men. Lila's cry pierced the cabin high, sharp, panicked. Mara's heart shattered at the sound. "Please, she's just a baby. Please." Brent didn't flinch. He turned toward the door. "Bring her," Mara lunged, grabbing at boots, pant legs, anything she could reach. She managed to tear one man's coat, leaving angry claw marks down his arm, but a harsh shove sent her crashing into the table. Her forehead struck the edge, and her vision blurred. Through the ringing in her ears, she saw Lila's tiny arms reaching toward her, fists trembling, mouth wide in a desperate scream. "Mama!" The storm swallowed the sound as the men carried the baby outside. Brent gave Mara one last look, annoyance mixed with triumph. "Debt settled," he said, and left. The door slammed behind him, wind whipping in through the broken frame. Mara lay on the floor, rain splattering across her face, tears mixing with blood. Her body shook with sobs she couldn't control. She crawled toward the doorway, dragging herself like a wounded animal. Outside, torches bobbed in the darkness as Brent and his men disappeared into the night with Lila. And for the first time since Thomas died, Mara screamed, not in fear, not in pure, soul-shattering fury. She would get her child back, even if it killed her. Morning crept slowly over Pine Hollow, casting pale gold across the muddy streets. For most of the townsfolk, it was just another day beneath Brent Callum's shadow. But word spread faster than wildfire. Brent had taken Mara Ellison's baby. People whispered about it behind shuttered windows, too frightened to say anything aloud. In Pine Hollow, everyone learned to mind their business. Brent's wrath was brutal and his reach long. But Mara didn't care about fear anymore. She had spent the night wandering the outskirts of town, calling Lila's name until her voice dissolved into a hoarse whisper. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but grief and fury kept her upright. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lila being carried away, tiny fingers reaching, her cry thin with terror. By dawn, Mara found herself in Doc Halpern's small clinic, a place that still held traces of mercy. The doctor patched the cut on her forehead and offered warm broth. He didn't ask questions. He already knew. "Mara," he said gently, "you can't face Brent alone." She stared into the untouched bowl, her hands trembling. "Then who can?" The doc hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the window, toward the mountains looming over Pine Hollow like silent giants. Mara followed his gaze. "What?" she asked. "Tell me," he sighed, weighing fear against compassion. "There's a man up there. Lives near the high ridge. Name's Ronan Hawley." Mara blinked. She had heard the name murmured in passing, children repeating campfire tales, ranch hands cursing him after too much whiskey. "People say he used to be a gunslinger," the doc continued. "Some say bounty hunter. Some say outlaw. Truth is, nobody really knows. He came to these mountains years ago and doesn't bother with anyone. But Brent," the doc lowered his voice, "Brent fears him." Mara felt her heartbeat stutter. "Why?" "Because Ronan once put 3 of Brent as best men in the dirt after they tried to run him off his land. Brent doesn't cross that ridge anymore." A spark flickered inside Mara's chest. "Not hope exactly something fiercer. Do you think he would help me?" The doctor paused. "I don't think Ronan helps anyone." The spark dimmed until he added softly, "But he hates Brent more than he loves his peace." Those words struck Mara like a lifeline. She rose from the chair. "I'll go to him." Doc Halpern stepped in front of her. "Mara, listen to me. Ronan Hawley isn't a savior. He isn't gentle. He isn't tame." He exhaled through his nose. "Some say he's half wild. Some say he's dangerous." Mara's jaw tightened. "So is every man in this town. Except he might be dangerous for me, not against me." The doc's eyes softened with pity. "It's a hard climb. You're exhausted. And if Ronan sends you away, then I'll try again," Mara said, her voice steadying. "I don't have the luxury of stopping." She left before the doctor could argue. Outside, the sun had risen fully over the peaks. They looked taller now, sharper, like they were cutting a path between her and the only man who might help her get her baby back. As Mara walked through town toward the mountain trailhead, people watched from behind curtains and half-open doors. Some shook their heads, some whispered prayers. None dared step out to stop her. But one woman, an older baker named Elsie, who had known Mara since she was a child, stepped onto her porch. "Mara," she called in a trembling voice, "is it true? You're going after that mountain man?" "Yes," Elsie swallowed. "Then may God walk beside you," Mara nodded, though she didn't know if God had anything to do with what she needed. She looked up at the ridge again. Ronan Hawley, the one man Brent feared. If he wouldn't help her, no one could. With nothing left but a mother's burning desperation, Mara tightened her shawl around her shoulders and began the long, perilous climb into the mountains toward the wild mystery who might be her last hope. The climb into the Bitterroot Mountains was far crueler than Mara had imagined. The trail, little more than a deer path, wound upward through tangled brambles and jutting rocks. Wind whipped across her face, sharp as broken glass, and cold crept through her thin dress. But pain didn't matter. Exhaustion didn't matter. Every step brought her closer to the one man who might help her reclaim Lila. By midday, the trees thickened, the air grew colder, and the world below Pine Hollow disappeared behind stone and forest. Mara paused to catch her breath, leaning against a cedar trunk. Her legs trembled, her lungs burned. "I have to keep going," she reminded herself, picturing Lila's tiny hands. If she stopped now, if she turned back, Brent would win and her daughter would grow up in the arms of a monster. She pushed forward. The trail steepened, twisting toward a ridge crowned with jagged rocks. Somewhere beyond those rocks lived Ronan Hawley. Even saying his name in her mind felt dangerous. Stories about him had evolved into legend stories of a man who hunted grizzlies with a single-shot rifle, who could track a whisper through the snow, who once faced down 5 outlaws with nothing but a hatchet. Mara had never believed in legends. But today, she was praying one would believe in her. Finally, she reached the crest of the ridge. The wind roared like an angry beast. Below, tucked between a stand of pines and a cliff edge, sat a small cabin built of rough-hewn logs. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. A few chopping stumps, a water trough, and a well-worn horse tether stood like silent guardians of the lonely home. Her heart hammered. This was it. She took one step toward the cabin and froze. A shape moved in the shadows. A man emerged slowly from the tree line, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying a fresh-cut log against one hip. His dark hair fell to his jawline, windswept and unkempt. His beard framed a face carved with hard angles, weathered by sun and solitude. His eyes cold, sharp, piercing, locked on her instantly. Ronan Hawley. Fear gripped her, sudden and chilling. She had faced wolves of the humankind before, but this man looked like someone who had walked into danger so many times he no longer flinched. He set the log down with a heavy thud. "You're trespassing." His voice was deep, quiet, and edged with warning. Mara swallowed hard. I'm looking for you. That's your first mistake." He wiped sawdust from his hands, gaze never softening. "Turn around, go home." "I can't," her voice cracked. She forced her trembling legs forward. "I need your help." Ronan's eyes flicked over her disheveled state, the torn shawl, scraped hands, blood caked along her hairline. His jaw tightened slightly, but his expression didn't soften. "I don't help people. You might help me." "No." He turned away, heading toward the cabin. Panic ignited in Mara's chest. She staggered after him. Please listen." "Brent Callum took my baby." Ronan stopped mid-step. He didn't turn, but his shoulders tensed, breath stilling like a predator scenting danger. She pressed on, desperation fueling her words. "He took her as payment for a debt. I have no one left. No family. No friends brave enough to cross him, but I heard you. You aren't afraid of him." Ronan slowly looked over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. "Fear has nothing to do with it," he said darkly. "Then help me," she whispered. He stared at her a long time, face unreadable, storm clouds gathering in his gaze. She felt exposed under that scrutiny, as if he were assessing every fracture in her soul. Finally, he exhaled. "If I help you," he said quietly, "you'll be walking into a war. I already am." A beat of silence. Then Ronan's expression shifted barely, but enough. "Fine," he said. "But understand this. Once we start, there's no turning back." For the first time in days, hope flickered inside her. Ronan Hawley had agreed. And Brent Callum's world was about to crack open. Ronan Hale's cabin was nothing like the stories claimed. It wasn't to the lair of a savage outlaw or a hideout filled with stolen loot. It was simple, practical, clean. A small fire crackled in the stone hearth. Dried herbs hung from rafters. A rifle leaned against the wall beside a pair of well-worn boots. The place felt lived in, quiet, almost peaceful. It made Mara even more aware of how chaotic her own life had become. Ronan shut the door behind them and tossed her a wool blanket. "You're shaking." "It's cold," she murmured, but they both knew the tremor in her hands came from fear, exhaustion, and the last ember of adrenaline keeping her upright. He studied her for a moment, not with pity, but with a kind of calculated concern, like a man assessing the strength of a bridge before crossing it. Then he set a pot of water over the fire. "You climbed that ridge half dead," he said. "You could have fallen. Could have been eaten up by night creatures. I had no choice." At that, Ronan's jaw tightened, just slightly. As if the words touched something inside him he'd long buried. He ladled hot water into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink." The warmth seeped into her frozen fingers. Mara sipped slowly, watching him move around the cabin with the quiet efficiency of someone who lived by instinct alone. Every movement was controlled, purposeful, dangerous, and yet he hadn't turned her away. After several moments of silence, she said softly, "Why do you hate Brent Callum?" Ronan's pause was brief, but filled with weight. "Not your concern." Mara lowered her eyes but didn't push. She understood wounds that could only be touched from the edges. Instead, she asked, "What do we do now?" Ronan sat on a wooden stool, elbows on his knees. "We prepare." "For what?" He looked at her squarely. "For war." Those words settled over her like snowfall, cold, heavy, irreversible. "Before we step foot into Pine Hollow, you need to learn a few things," Ronan continued. "How to ride hard, how to trek, how to stay alive, and how to shoot." Mara's breath hitched. "Shoot?" "Yes." His gaze didn't waver. "You can't rely on me alone. Brent will come for you. His men don't stop until the job's done. You need to be able to defend yourself." Fear crawled through her. She had never held a gun, let alone fired one. But the image of Lila crying in a stranger's arms steeled her spine. "I'll learn," Mara whispered. Ronan stood and retrieved a pistol from a lockbox beneath his bed, sleek, polished, deadly. He placed it gently in Mara's hands. Even unloaded, it felt heavy with possibility. We started dawn. The following days were brutal. Ronan showed no softness, no leniency. He trained her with the strict focus of a man who had survived more battles than he cared to remember. She learned to aim, to breathe steadily, to shoot without flinching. Her first shot missed by a mile. Her second barely grazed the target. By the fourth day, she struck dead center. Ronan gave a single nod, his version of praise. "Good." He taught her to ride his second horse, a restless roan named Flint. At first, she nearly fell twice. But Mara held on, gritting her teeth until her thighs ached. He taught her to move silently through underbrush, to read footprints in dirt, to listen for the difference between the wind and a threat. Through it all, something began to shift between them. Ronan wasn't cruel, only guarded. His harshness came from the reality of what awaited them, not from disdain. And Mara wasn't fragile, only afraid. Her courage grew each time she refused to quit. One evening, after hours of training, Mara sat on a log, rubbing her aching hands. "You're different from what people say," she murmured. Ronan looked up from cleaning his rifle. "People say a lot without knowing anything." She met his eyes, their intensity softened by firelight. "Then I'm glad I came to find the truth." A flicker, almost a smile, too faint to be real, crossed his face. Ronan Hale, the mountain ghost feared by half the territory, was becoming something unexpected. Her ally? And maybe, just maybe, her hope. While Mara trained in the mountains, Pine Hollow slipped deeper into Brent Callum's chokehold. The townsfolk had always lived under his shadow, but after he took Mara's baby, something changed. Brent felt untouchable now, and men like him only grew crueler when they sensed no one would stand against them. The saloon buzzed with whispers behind clenched teeth. "Did you hear what he did to Mara Ellison? Lord help her." "That poor child. Don't talk about it." Brent's ears are everywhere, and they weren't wrong. Brent had doubled the number of men patrolling the streets, thick-necked brutes in brown dusters, rifles slung over shoulders, hands twitching near their belts. They claimed it was for keeping order, but everyone knew the truth. They were searching for signs of trouble, or rebellion, or the faintest hint that Mara might come back. Brent wasn't just cruel. He was scared. His office above the saloon became a fortress. Extra locks on the door. A guard posted outside at all hours. Windows covered with iron bars under the guise of new safety measures. His men were restless, muttering about the strange precautions. "Why so jumpy, boss?" one asked one evening. Brent glared at him, swirling whiskey in a glass. "Because that woman isn't stupid," he said. "And she isn't alone." The man blinked. "Alone? Who'd help her?" "Whole town's terrified of you." Brent smirked, but tension tightened his jaw. "Someone out there hates me more than they fear me." The name wasn't spoken, but everyone knew who he meant. Ronan Hale. Whispers of the mountain man drifted through the town like smoke. Some said Mara was hiding with him. Others said he had already come down from the ridge and was watching the town from the tree line, waiting for his moment. Children whispered stories of a ghostly figure moving through the woods at night. Brent dismissed most of it as superstition, but not all. Ronanhale was real. And Brent had a long, ugly history with him, which was why Brent did something even his closest man hadn't expected. He hid the baby. Lila was no longer kept in his office or at his estate. Rumor had it she had been moved to a secret location. Some claimed a farmhouse outside of town. Others whispered she was in the mines, the very place Thomas Ellison had died. Only Brent knew for sure. And he wasn't telling. Meanwhile, the townspeople moved like ghosts through the streets. Mothers clung to their children a little tighter. Shopkeepers locked up early. Even the sheriff, once proud, now weary, avoided Brent's men whenever possible. Fear had become the air they breathed. But beneath that fear, a spark flickered. For the first time in years, people started glancing toward the mountains with something that almost looked like hope. One morning, Elsie the baker overheard two cowhands whispering near her shop. "Brent's losing sleep," one said. "Heard he wakes screaming," the other replied. "Keep saying someone's coming for him." "Who?" the cowhand swallowed. "The mountain man." Elsie felt a chill dance down her spine, not from fear, but from the memory of Mara's determined face as she climbed the ridge alone. If Ronanhale was truly with her, if their return was inevitable, maybe Pine Hollow's nightmare was finally nearing its end. Brent, however, was not a man to sit and wait for fate to strike. As the days passed and Mara didn't reappear, he convinced himself she must be plotting something. His rage simmered. His paranoia grew. He shouted at his men, demanded they search farther, harder, wider. The moment they returned empty-handed, he doubled the patrols. And the more afraid he became, the more dangerous he was. In the quiet heart of Pine Hollow, fear ruled. But in the mountains above it, Ronanhale was preparing for war. And soon, very soon, that fear would turn into fire. By the time the seventh day dawned in the mountains, Mara was no longer the fragile, trembling woman who had stumbled into Ronanhale's territory. Her muscles still ached, her hands still blistered, and fear still lived inside her, but it no longer ruled her. She had become sharper, steadier, stronger. A woman with a purpose, a mother with a mission, Ronan noticed. Though he said little, his eyes followed her with a new measure of respect. She rose before sunrise, practiced her shooting without being asked, fed Flint and Ronan's horse, Ghost, and rehearsed the lessons he had taught her on tracking, riding, and staying alive. The desperation that had once consumed her had hardened into resolve. On the morning of the seventh day, Ronan set aside his rifle and said, "It's time." Mara's grip on the tin cup tightened. Time for what? For the plan. Those three words made her blood thrum with both fear and anticipation. Ronan rolled out a crude map he had drawn in charcoal on tanned hide. Pine Hollow sat at the center, a cluster of squares representing buildings. Roads, mines, and outlying farms branched around it like veins. Mara leaned closer. "Do you know where he's keeping her?" Ronan tapped two spots with a calloused finger. "I've narrowed it to these. One is his estate?" Mara guessed. "Yes, but that's too obvious." "Brent's arrogant, but he isn't stupid. And the other?" Ronan hesitated for a beat. "The old mining storehouse." Mara felt her stomach drop. He couldn't take her there." "That place is where your husband died," Ronan finished quietly. His voice carried no pity, only truth. "Which is why Brent thinks no one would dare look." A tremor ran through her. The thought of Lila in the cold, damp darkness of the abandoned mine felt like a knife twisting in her ribs. "We'll check the storehouse first," Ronan said. "Quietly. If she's not there, we move to the estate." "But both are guarded." "How many men?" she asked. 9 at the estate. Maybe 3 at the storehouse. So we go there first." Ronan nodded. "We leave tonight. Tonight." The word echoed in her chest like a heartbeat. For 9 long days she had lived with the agony of not knowing where Lila was. Tonight, that would change. Tonight, she would either find her daughter or die trying. Ronan continued outlining the plan. They would ride under cover of darkness, using the mountain trails only Ronan knew to reach the north edge of town unseen. From there, they would approach the storehouse on foot. Ronan would take out the guards. Mara would slip inside and search for Lila. Mara swallowed. And if Brent is there? Then I deal with him, Ronan said simply. There was no arrogance in his tone, only certainty. And violence. The kind of violence a man carried after a lifetime of being betrayed, hunted, hardened by the worst the world had to offer. But Mara saw something else beneath that steel edge. A promise. To her. To Lila. To justice. The day passed in tense silence. Mara packed only what she needed. Water, a knife, spare rounds, a scrap of Lila's baby blanket she had kept hidden in her shawl. Ronan sharpened his hatchet, checked his rifles, filled saddlebags with supplies. As the sun sank behind the peaks, Mara stepped outside the cabin. The mountains glowed gold, then amber, then dusky violet. The wind was brisk, stirring the pine needles in a restless whisper. Ronan emerged beside her, Ghost already saddled. Flint snorted and pawed at the dirt as if sensing what lay ahead. "You ready?" Ronan asked. Mara met his gaze, her voice steady. "Yes." He studied her for a heartbeat. Something softened in his expression. Respect, admiration, maybe something deeper he didn't know how to name. "You did the impossible," he murmured. "You climbed this mountain. You didn't break." "Brent Callum has no idea what's coming," Mara exhaled shakily. "Not fear, not doubt, purpose. Let's go get my daughter." Ronan mounted his horse. Mara swung onto Flint. Together they turned toward the darkening trail. Tonight, Pine Hollow would hear the whisper of vengeance riding down from the mountains. And a mother's love would become a force no man could stand against. The air inside Brent Callum's fortified compound felt heavier than the dust swirling on the street outside. Smoke from burning gunpowder hung low, stinging eyes and throats. Mara could taste metal on her tongue, fear, sweat, and determination mixed together. The echoes of the gunfight along Main Street still ricocheted inside her chest, but she forced her breath into steady, shallow pulls. They were inside now. There was no turning back. Ronan walked ahead of her with the controlled stride of a man who had survived too many ambushes to count. His rifle stayed raised, sweeping shadows, checking corners. Mara mirrored his movements, gripping her revolver with both hands even though her fingers trembled. She had trained for this days of shooting hours of bruised cheeks and sore wrists on the mountain, and yet nothing could have truly prepared her for the reality. The screams, the thud of bodies hitting the dirt, the sight of lives ending so she could save her child. A creak sounded from the hallway to their right. Ronan reacted instantly, shoving Mara behind a toppled dining table just as a bullet tore a splintered hole through the wood. Mara gasped, but she didn't freeze. She steadied her weapon, leaned around the table, and fired. Her shot found its mark accurate, controlled, exactly like Ronan taught her. The man dropped, and she felt neither triumph nor guilt. Only urgency. "Good," Ronan whispered. "Stay behind me. Brent's close. He'll use every trick he knows." Every muscle in Mara's body tightened at the sound of her baby's name echoing faintly through the house, a soft, muffled cry that turned her heart inside out. Lila was here, alive, terrified. That sound gave Mara strength she didn't know she had. They moved deeper, past the kitchen, down a narrow passage lined with crates of stolen goods. This was where Brent stored the valuables he extorted from half the valley tools. Blankets, jewelry, even children's toys ripped from families who owed him too much. The sight hardened Mara's resolve. Brent wasn't just cruel, he was parasitic. At the end of the hallway, two of Brent's best gunmen waited. Ronan recognized them instantly. "Down," he muttered, dropping into a crouch and firing before the men could fully raise their weapons. Mara ducked as bullets cracked overhead. The battle lasted only seconds, but each second felt stretched thin. When the final guard fell, silence returned, heavy, expectant. Ronan's gaze flicked to a reinforced door. "He's in there." Mara's legs nearly gave way. She placed her palm flat against the wood. Lila's cry came again, shrill, frightened, unmistakably her daughter's voice. Mara choked on a sob of raw relief and rage. Ronan kicked the door open. Inside stood Brent Callum, face twisted in a smile that wasn't a smile at all, more a sneer of possession. He held baby Lila in the crook of one arm and a pistol in the other. His grip on the baby was firm, bordering cruel. Lila squirmed, her cheeks wet with tears, reaching for her mother the moment she saw her. "Well, look who made it," Brent drawled. "Little Mara Ellison, marching in like a hero. Shame you won't be leaving." Ronan's gun lifted an inch. Brent pressed his pistol to Lila's tiny ribs. Mara's heart shattered. She raised her hand slowly, keeping her weapon down. Not surrender strategy. Brent's eyes glittered. "This child is worth more than you ever were. Debt's a debt." Something broke inside Mara then, not fear, not fury, but clarity. She met Ronan's eyes for a fraction of a second, and he understood. The battle for Lila had begun, and it would end here, one way or another. The room was suffocating, the air thick with smoke, sweat, and the acrid tang of gunpowder. Mara's eyes locked on Brent Callum, who clutched baby Lila tightly, pistol aimed and confidence painted across his cruel face. Every instinct in Mara screamed to charge, to fight, but she knew Ronan had a plan. His calm, deadly presence beside her grounded her, a reminder that this moment would decide everything. Brent's grin widened. "You really think you can take her back? You? A mother with nothing but guts and luck?" He pressed Lila slightly against his chest, testing Mara's reaction. "She's mine now." "You'll see." Mara swallowed, keeping her voice low but steady. "You're wrong. She's never been yours." Ronan's hand shifted subtly, just enough that Mara felt the barely perceptible signal. "Get ready. Wait for my mark." They had rehearsed this in the mountains, though nothing could truly prepare her for this moment, the stakes so high her pulse threatened to tear her chest open. Brent laughed cruelly. "Brave words for a girl who owes me everything." Then, a sharp click, the sound of a hammer pulling back. Ronan had drawn his rifle, careful, precise. The angle was perfect. Brent's confidence faltered for just a heartbeat enough. Mara felt her heart clench as Lila squirmed and cried, tiny fists clutching at Brent's vest. "Mama!" the baby called out, and something fierce and unstoppable rose in Mara. She was a mother. And nothing, not fear, not death, not Brent, would stop her from saving her child. Brent's voice snapped, ordering her to freeze, but Mara didn't flinch. She raised her pistol, breathing steadily as Ronan's gaze met hers. Now, Ronan fired a single clean shot. The bullet struck the gun from Brent's hand with a loud bang, sending it skittering across the floor. He staggered back, stunned. Mara didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, catching Lila in her arms and shielding her with her body. Brent roared, stumbling toward her with rage, but Ronan was already moving quick, silent, unstoppable. He met Brent head-on. Fists and boots collided, a blur of raw strength and skill. The fight was brutal and swift, each man pushing the other to the edge. Mara, holding Lila tightly, ducked instinctively as Brent swung wildly. "Get her out!" Ronan shouted, a single command that carried all the authority of a man who had faced death countless times. Mara bolted for the doorway, the baby secure against her chest, heart hammering in perfect synchrony with each tiny kick and wail. Brent's movement slowed rage-clouded judgment, and Ronan exploited it without hesitation. With a final, precise strike, Brent fell to the floor, defeated and broken. The threat that had haunted Mara, the shadow that had loomed over every night of fear, was gone. Mara didn't pause. She ran through the building, holding Lila closer, feeling the warmth of her daughter's tiny body, the rhythm of her heartbeat against her own. The danger wasn't just gone, it was vanquished. Outside, the storm had cleared, leaving Pine Hollow bathed in the pale, soft light of early morning. Mara breathed in the air, salty and fresh, and for the first time in weeks or months she could feel hope returning. Lila stirred, peering up at her mother with wide, trusting eyes. Ronan appeared beside her, catching his breath, his rifle lowered but his eyes still vigilant. Mara looked up at him, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, relief, and the faint beginnings of something deeper. The nightmare was over. Lila was safe. And the mountain man who had once seemed like a ghost, a danger, had become her ally, her protector, and maybe even something more. Mara's heart swelled as she held her daughter, realizing that the fight had changed them all her courage, Ronan's sense of purpose, and even the town which would now see that even the darkest tyranny could be broken by those brave enough to stand against it. The morning sun spilled over Pine Hollow, casting long golden rays across the streets that had only yesterday been thick with fear. For weeks, the town had held its collective breath, hiding behind shuttered doors and whispering in hushed tones. Now, the streets slowly came alive, tentative at first, then with cautious curiosity. Word had spread that Brent Callum was gone, defeated by a mother as courage and the skill of a mountain man who had long haunted their legends. Mara walked through the town holding Lila close. Her daughter's small hands wrapped around her neck, clutching her mother's shawl as though never willing to let go. Mara's arms ached, but it was a good ache of pain born of relief, triumph, and the joy of reunion. The townsfolk peeked from windows, stepping outside as they realized the nightmare that had gripped them for so long had ended. Mothers whispered prayers of thanks. Children laughed and ran through the streets. Even the sheriff, once so weary and silent, nodded at Mara in respect. Ronan Hawley walked beside her, silent but ever watchful. The mountain man who had once been a ghost, a figure feared and misunderstood, now seemed to carry the town's fragile hope on his broad shoulders. He didn't seek acknowledgement or gratitude. His work was done because it had to be done, because he had chosen to stand for justice when few others would. Mara glanced at him, and for the first time she saw a flicker of warmth beneath his guarded exterior. "Ronan," she said softly, "thank you." "For everything." He shrugged, hiding his emotions, though his eyes betrayed a hint of something she couldn't yet name. "You would have done the same for her," he replied. "Maybe better." Mara shook her head, smiling despite the lingering tears. "Not like this. I wouldn't have made it without you." They walked past the empty saloon where Brent had ruled, past the general store, the blacksmith's forge, the little schoolhouse. Pine Hollow was waking up to a new reality, one where fear no longer dictated their lives. And though Mara's story of survival, courage, and love would be whispered for years to come, the real story was far more intimate. A mother who refused to surrender a child saved, and a man who had found a reason to step back into the world he had abandoned. That evening, Mara and Ronan returned to the edge of the town where the mountains began. The sky was painted in shades of amber and rose, the sun dipping behind the peaks like a golden promise. Lila had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, exhausted but safe. Mara sat on a flat rock, holding her daughter close, and finally allowed herself to breathe fully. Ronan knelt beside her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "She's strong," he said. "Just like her mother." Mara looked up at him. "And what about you, Ronan Hawley? Do you always protect strangers like this?" she asked with a teasing tone, though her voice carried an undertone of gratitude and curiosity. He met her gaze, expression unreadable for a moment. Then he smiled faintly, the kind of smile reserved for rare, quiet moments. "Only the ones worth saving," he said. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, unspoken promises, and the possibility of something neither of them had expected: love. As the stars began to glitter overhead, Mara realized that the fear and darkness that had consumed her life were gone. In their place were courage, hope, and the warmth of a new family. Lila's soft breaths against her chest reminded her that life had been restored, not just for her child, but for herself. Ronan stood, offering his hand. Mara took it, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly with each heartbeat. Together they turned toward the mountains, toward home, toward a life that could finally be theirs. Pine Hollow would remember this day, the day the tide of fear was turned, the day a mother fought for her child, and the day a mountain man rode into town at noon and changed everything. A new beginning had come.